This dude assaulted and executed at least 10 people, but he didn't stop there. He'd grind up their bodies and make them into meat patties that he'd sold in burgers to customers on the street. Little did they know, they were eating human flesh. The first alleged murder committed by Joe was in 1994. Well, it wasn't just one, it was like multiple. So at the time, Joe lived in Baltimore with his wife and their son. One day when Joe got home from work, he turned on the lights to find out that his wife had packed up her things and left with their son. Yikes. Joe was a very angry, mentally unstable person, so he didn't receive this well. I should also mention that even though Joe's nickname was Tiny, he was a really big guy. Reports say he stood at 6'1", weighing somewhere around 400 to 500 pounds. That's no small dude. Joe became enraged by his wife taking their son and decided to look for her. Since she was also an addict, Joe assumed she must have been hanging out with her other addicts or dealers. Joe began searching high and low for his girl. He looked in halfway houses and all of her favorite spots to smoke, snort, and shoot up at. One of these spots was under a bridge. When Joe went down under that bridge, he didn't find his wife, but he did find two homeless men lying on a mattress. Joe asked them if they knew his wife, and they said no. But Joe didn't believe them. He was convinced these men knew his wife, and he was going to do whatever it took to retaliate against her for taking their son. So Joe took the axe he casually carried down there and chopped those two homeless men into pieces. And later that evening, Joe admitted to luring a female escort down to the bridge area with him. She was the kind of woman who would do intimate favors in exchange for substances. Anyway, Joe got this girl high and asked if she knew where his wife was. She said no, but Joe knew that she was lying. And with that, he forced himself on her and chopped her up with his axe. He hid the remnants of her body behind some bushes and proceeded to lure another woman down there with him. Joe did the same exact thing to this woman, got her high, asked her about his wife, assaulted her, and slayed her with an axe. As he went back to hide her body behind the bushes, Joe realized that he wasn't alone. He saw a fisherman on a boat in the river who may have seen what he had just done. Joe didn't want any witnesses. So what else did he do other than knock out this guy too? This time, he used a steel pipe to the head. The fisherman brought Joe's victim count to 5. To make sure he hid all the evidence, Joe ended up tossing the body parts of all the 5 victims in the river with some rocks to weigh it all down. Joe cleaned himself off in the river and went about his evening. There are some theories out there that the axe Joe used that night was stolen by a man named Larry Amos, who executed a homeless man named Everett Dowell with it. Sadly, this is a common victim type for mass executioners, homeless people, and escorts. Most homeless people don't have friends or relatives who can report them missing, so a lot of criminals believe they'll get away with slaying them. For escorts, it's very similar. Most don't keep in touch with their family enough for them to know that they're gone. They might have more friends or coworkers, but they're also probably in the same field and won't go to the police out of fear of being arrested for working an illegal job. But Joe's executions didn't go unreported. A little over 2 weeks after the tragic evening, Joe was arrested and charged for offing the 2 homeless men. He was in jail for about 1.5 years before his trial began. At the trial, there wasn't enough evidence to prove that Joe's guilt, so he was just set free. But he later confessed to committing all 5 homicides that night. People believe Joe went after his first set of victims purely out of revenge. He later stated that he hated his wife. He was quoted saying, "I would have paid to get her out of my life." The main reason he said he was upset that she took their son, he claimed that if his wife took their son to his mom's house, he would have been fine with her leaving. He later found out that his wife moved across town to stay with a dealer who was employing her. It wasn't long before she got caught and their son was sent to a foster home. But no matter how he got into these heinous crimes, Joe had been bitten by the bug. He loved the thrill of slaying people, and it was only a matter of time before he pounced again. Once Joe was released from prison, he got his forklift driving job back. The pallet company he worked for had a trailer on the property, so Joe made a deal with his boss to live in it. He would get a free place to live, and his boss would have an extra set of eyes on the property around the clock. It definitely sounds like a better deal for Joe, but I guess I don't know the security situation there. And Joe would scare off any intruders without a doubt. That's That's for sure. The pallet company was conveniently positioned at the end of a dead-end road that was pretty desolate, meaning Joe could do whatever he wanted in that trailer without anyone seeing him. So he invited over 2 female escorts, Kathy Magaziner and Kimberly Spicer, promising to give them substances. Instead, he jabbed them with blades, strangled them, and mutilated their bodies. I wasn't able to determine if these slangs took place at the same time, but they at least happened close together and were carried out similarly. Joe cut the meat off of both victims and put it in plastic storage containers in the freezer. As for the inedible parts, Joe buried them in the ground under a stack of wooden pallets at work. As for the human meat in the fridge, Joe mixed it with the pork and beef to create burger patties. He didn't just eat these patties himself, he wanted to share them with the world, without them knowing, of course. Joe set up a barbecue stand on the side of the road and sold the human meat patties to local customers. The weird part is, no one mentioned anything strange about the taste of the patties. Joe later told the authorities the human body tastes very similar to pork. If you mix it together, no one can tell the difference. So the next time you're riding down the road, you happen to see an open pit beef stand that you've never seen before, make sure you think about this story before you take a bite out of that sandwich. Now that there was a demand for this special meat, Joe had to keep up with the supply. So it was on to the next victim. Joe invited another woman named Rita to his trailer and planned to follow the same protocol as his previous 2 victims. But Rita was different. When she first arrived at Joe's trailer, they partook in substances. After that, Joe asked Rita to perform some favors for him, which she declined. If you didn't already know this about Joe, he didn't take no for an answer. It was his way or the highway. Rita tried to run away, but Joe chased after her and brought her back to his trailer. He beat her up, ripped off her clothes, and he was preparing to execute her. During the struggle, Rita managed to escape from the window of Joe's trailer. It wasn't easy to get out though. Rita had to climb on a stack of wooden pallets to jump the tall chain link fence. But this was truly a life or death situation, and Rita's adrenaline did its thing. Rita successfully hopped the fence and waved down a guy in a truck for help. The man took her to a gas station to call the police and report the incident. Once Rita successfully escaped, Joe scrambled to get out of the trailer ASAP. He packed some clothes and headed to the gate to exit. When he opened the gate, he was welcomed by a cop whose weapon was drawn. The cop ordered Joe to get on the ground. The police put Joe in cuffs and took him to the station. He was interrogated by the authorities, who probably didn't expect to hear much from the guy. Most criminals keep their mouth shut and ask for their lawyer. But Joe wasn't like most criminals, clearly. He admitted to slaying at least 10 victims and told the investigators about everything in excruciating detail with pride. I guess Joe knew he was trapped, so he decided to come clean. Now, if you've been keeping count, I haven't mentioned the details of all 10 victims. That's because there isn't much information on the others. And also, you get the point at number 7. I mean, it gets hard to hear about these harsh cases over and over and over again. Right before he was arrested, Joe was reported to the police by a friend, who is now a snitch, but for a good reason. The friend told authorities that Joe asked him to help bury Kimberly's body, so the police were able to connect Joe to that case early on. Joe also told them where to find Kathy's body. They followed his instructions and dug up remnants of her corpse. This meant that Joe was connected to her case as well, and we already know that he was tied to Rita's case. Even though Joe confessed to executing more victims, there wasn't the evidence to link him to them all. At one point, he was pinned for slaying a girl named Tony, but those charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence. The authorities just wanted to get Joe in jail for good. They were confident he would be found guilty for what he did to those women, so that's what they focused on. Joe first went to trial for Rita's case. This was in 1997. He was found guilty of kidnapping and sexual assault, but not attempted homicide. He was sentenced to 50 years for this. The following year, he went to trial for the homicide of Kimberly. He gushed to the jury about how much he enjoyed hurting these women. He said he got a rush out of it, got a high out of it, and had no real excuse why, other than I like to do it. He was found guilty and was sentenced to be executed. Shortly after that, Joe took the stand for Kathy's case. Joe begged the jury to give him the ultimate punishment for this one as well. He said the words, "I'm sorry," will never come out, for they would be a lie. I am more than willing to give up my life for what I have done, to have God judge me and send me to hell for eternity. Well, Joe didn't get what he wanted. Instead of the ultimate penalty, he was assigned life in prison without parole. which I think was very intentional based on Joe's request. After that, his lethal sentence for Kimberly's case was changed to life in prison, meaning Joe would rot in prison until he passed away naturally. And in 2017, he did. Joe passed away in prison at age 64, and I truly believe the world is a better place because of this. Joe was very open about why he did what he did, but was that the full story? In court, Joe's attorney pulled out all the stops. They dished on Joe's traumatic childhood to try and justify their client's actions. Joe's dad was a raging alcoholic who passed away in a car crash when Joe was just 6. As for Joe's mom, she never really gave him the time of day. She had 6 children and had to work a double essentially every day to make ends meet. Joe was apparently pawned off on other people fairly often just to watch over him. Joe's mom denies these claims though. She admitted to working a lot, but said her children were always taken care of and never sent to live with other people. Joe's mom said he was smart and had a good childhood. If he was neglected, it was his own fault. It was a pretty good home. So I wonder if this whole bad childhood thing was a last resort for Joe's lawyers. Seems like it to me. So where did things fall apart? When Joe joined the army at age 18. He served in Germany and claimed to have served in Vietnam, where he said he got addicted to opioids. Again, Joe's mom shot this down. She said her son did join the army and serve in Germany, but he definitely didn't serve in Vietnam. By the time that Joe was in the army, the United States was no longer involved in Vietnam, so that was a flat-out lie. Joe's mom said they pretty much lost touch after he joined the army, and once Joe got into substances, that was a done deal. No matter how he got into it, Joe fell into a very dark place with his addiction. He never faced the issues head-on, surrounded himself with the wrong people, and went down a terrible path. When he committed his first crimes out of hatred for his wife, his addictive personality latched onto the feeling of harming others, which began an awful downward spiral. If only Joe was found guilty of slaying the 2 homeless men back when he was first arrested, this would be an entirely different story. He just had to be set free and become a raging cannibal. And that's a wrap on Joe. I am done wasting my time and energy talking about a man who doesn't deserve either of those things, but it's important to look back at those cases to learn from them. I guess my main takeaway is to be a good person and to not turn people into human burger patties. Oh, also, call the cops if your friend asks you to hide a body. I'm Mac. Thanks for watching Killer Bites.